Why did all the religions come from the Middle East?
This is a good question.
Atheists
Why
say
did all
that
religions
Islam was
come
spread
from
by the sword.
the Middle
Is that
East?
true? Which religion will write the history of the future? Buddha is said to be a prophet.
You know who this
that
is?
True?
We don't know.
Yeah,
We can never know. How do we know that the prophets didn't come to Amazon jungle? Islam is the only religion which is making huge progress. Hold on a second, we never heard that. Or maybe you added this word, one word added to that sentence. It would be questioned, challenged immediately by these very people at that time.
Who is Adnan Rashid?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Adnan Rashid and I'm a historian. I studied in London for my degree. I did my master's in history and I'm pursuing higher studies
Adnan
at the
Rashid.
moment.
Oh.
I'm a book
You've seen him
collector.
before?
I preserve
I have not.
heritage such as manuscripts and numismatic evidence. Generally speaking, I'm a traveler and I'm also a writer.
Why did all the religions come from the Middle East?
How do we know that the prophets didn't come to other people? My question would be, okay, we know there are prophets who came from the Middle East, absolutely, but we believe that prophets were sent to all nations in different times and different places. How do we know that the prophets didn't come to Amazon jungle, to those tribes? How do we know if the prophets never came to Zulu people? How do we know if prophets never came to the people of Papua New Guinea living in the jungles? How do we know the prophets never came to Aborigines in Australia and those prophets were followed and their teachings were forgotten? So this is a very strange claim or question, you know. How do we know? Absence of evidence does not mean, evidence for absence. So that's my answer to that question. We know prophets or teachers were sent by God to all people in different places. Where prophets never came, where people never found prophets and they found themselves to be in misguidance, they will be judged by God on the Day of Judgment according to their situations, according to their circumstances. Whether they followed whatever principles they had inherited naturally, it is part of human fitrah, nature, our innate disposition that certain things are wrong. To harm others, to cause pain to others is wrong. We know that. So there are certain things part of our fitrah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use our fitrah to judge us on the Day of Judgment for those who did not receive the message from a messenger of God.
Atheists say that Islam was spread by the sword. Is that true?
It depends what they mean by that. The territory of Islam was spread by the sword, absolutely, no doubt, unashamedly. We accept that because the Muslims fought the Persians, the Romans, to take the territory from them to bring justice to these people. We, the Muslims, believe that early Muslims, when they went out fighting the Romans and the Persians, they were fighting tyranny, they were fighting oppression, and we know that from the people who invited the Muslims into these lands. We have so many testimonies that the Byzantine territory, such as Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Egypt, people were inviting the Muslims to come and remove the Romans, the Byzantines, because the Romans, the Byzantines were oppressing the masses of these people. But Islam as a religion was never forced upon people. And when it was forced upon people, the scholars of Islam were the first people to stand up against such actions. In chapter 2 of the Quran, verse 256, the Quran says, La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana rushdu min al-ghayy. Okay, there is no compulsion in religion. And this verse is specifically talking about non-Muslims. It is absolutely haram, forbidden, prohibited in Islam to force non-Muslims to accept Islam, because the Quran says the truth stands clear from falsehood. When people want to accept willingly, let them accept. If they don't want to accept, then be kind to them. How do we know this? In chapter 60 of the Quran, Surah Al-Mumtahina, verse 8, that Allah does not forbid you from being kind to those non-Muslims who do not fight you for your faith. So that's what the Quranic principle is when it comes to non-Muslims. And pick up the histories and see Muslims created a civilization.
Could you read 65 to 4 and then 33:49 to know why the Idu is needed?
Hey, Chef Boy, I'm down to read these verses after I finish eating. Cheers, brother.
Called the Muslim civilization, which of the histories and see Muslims created a civilization called the Muslim civilization, which gave breathing space to the Jewish people, which gave breathing space to the Christian people. They coexisted. 3 Abrahamic faiths coexisted for the first time in human history under the umbrella of Islam. So this is why Muslims took all that land.
Buddha is said to be a prophet. Is that true?
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We saw that 80% of our audience included people.
Know much about Buddha.
Buddha is said to be a prophet. Is that true?
We don't know. We can never know. We don't even know much about Buddha. We don't have his tradition preserved. We don't have his teachings that reach us without any corruption. So Buddhists, whatever they attribute to him, we don't know if it's true or not.
Is the dead body in the British Museum the pharaoh in the time of Moses?
That's not a pharaoh. That's a body which was found preserved in the sand, and that body is nearly 5,000 years old. It comes from 3000 BC. He's just an unknown person who died and was preserved in sand. That's not an Egyptian body, to my knowledge.
Is it true that early humans were primitive, like the Stone Age and the caveman?
Okay, a lot of these stories are made up. These are fictional, not an Egyptian body, to my knowledge.
Is it true that early humans were primitive, like the Stone Age and the caveman?
Okay, a lot of these stories are made up. These are fictional stories. These drawings made by Darwinists and National Geography magazines, when they show you a caveman, hairy caveman, looking like an ape, is half human and half ape. There is no evidence in the fossil record for this stuff. This is a very basic answer I can give you right now. These categorizations are made by scientists and historians to basically divide the historic development of humans. They're not necessarily absolute. We don't have to necessarily follow them. But we do know, even Islamically speaking, that Adam alayhi salam, the first humans, were basically very simple. They had simple tools, they had simple lives. They didn't have things we have today. It took us a very long time to get here. So are we going to look down upon the people who were living in the 10th century, let's say, 1,000 years ago? No, we're not. They were very intelligent people. So humans have always been intelligent. From the very time they emerged on the scene in this planet, they have been intelligent. God gave certain characteristics and abilities to humans to survive, to live their lives. They only got more sophisticated with the knowledge, with the experience they gained through life.
Some deniers say about Islam as a copy of past beliefs like the Sumerians. How would you answer that as a historian?
As a historian, I would say that if Sumerians have documented a fact and that fact is repeated in the Quran, then it's a fact, it's history. But if they mean, people who claim this, that Quran plagiarized blindly from the Bible, from the Sumerians, from the Egyptians, then they are plainly wrong. I'll give you one quick example. When we read the Bible in the book of Genesis, we see that the king of Egypt is Pharaoh at the time of Abraham, at the time of Joseph, and at the time of Moses. So Moses lived somewhere around the New Kingdom period. And Joseph and Abraham were around in the Old Kingdom during the Hyksos periods. So when Hyksos people were ruling Egypt, who were not pharaohs, who were not from the same background, they used the title Your Majesty, King. In their language, it was Ham. So at that time, the title Pharaoh or Para'a in the ancient Egyptian language was not used for the king as a title. It was there as a reference to the great house. But as a title for the king, strictly speaking, it was used repeatedly after the year 1500 BC, during the New Kingdom. So amazingly, the Quran makes that distinction correctly. In chapter 12 of the Quran, Surah Yusuf, when you read the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf, when he talks about the king, he doesn't call him Pharaoh, calls him Malik, simply Malik. But when you come to Moses in the Quran, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Go to Pharaoh because he has transgressed. So this distinction is very clear in the Quran, but it is not clear in the Bible. So this is clearly a historic error in the text of the Bible, which the Quran did not copy. So the Quran is clearly not plagiarizing.
How can you prove that the Quran has been preserved until today?
The Quran was revealed in the 7th century upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet Muhammad was 40 years old when the revelation came down upon him, and the Quran was written in front of the Prophet by his companions on different materials. For example, they used skins of trees, they used leather, they used bones, and they used wooden, basically plaques, to write the Quran on them. Every time the Prophet would receive the Quran, he would start reading it, and his companions would be sitting around him, listening to the Quran, writing it. So at the same time, it was memorized through memory. And later on, it was transmitted to the future generations by the same companions, especially Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh. During his time, there was a standardization of the text. So the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they took every single word of the Quran and they wrote it down. They authenticated the language, the style, and even the script, and then they transmitted it. So we have copies of the Quran written at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions that can be found in global libraries. For example, we have the Sana manuscripts. They were found in Yemen, and those manuscripts have been carbon dated to that age. Basically, they have come from the time of Uthman radiallahu anh. And then there is Birmingham parchment, which was carbon dated. The date was basically between 568 to 645 CE. That particular parchment was prepared within the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Not necessarily the writing. The writing could be slightly later, but the animal was killed within that time when the Prophet was alive, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Do we have all these pages of the Quran from that date, or just some pages?
We have almost all of the Quran from the 1st century. We put all the manuscripts together because there is one in Turkey in the Topkapi Museum. Then we have St. Petersburg copy, we have Tashkent copy, we have Husseini Mosque copy. Some of these copies may be later. They may be from the 2nd century of Hijri. But if we collect all the copies we have in global libraries, in global collections, we can basically have the entirety of the Quran. The entire text of the Quran can be collected from the copies from the 1st century. So the Quran is preserved. I mean, we can say with confidence that we have exactly the same Quran today, word by word, that was read and written by the very disciples, the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
How do we know that the hadith have been preserved?
Oh, this is a good question. How do we know that the hadiths have been preserved?
How do we know that the hadith have been preserved to the present day?
Hadith basically is the prophetic tradition, information attributed to the Prophet, what he...
What's up, River?
Hear me?
Yeah, except it's quiet.
If you want, I got a video that'll be interesting for you. Just like learning about hadiths. It's like 10 minutes if you watch it.
I think I'm gonna finish this video. Although I don't know if the stream is delayed, how long it's delayed, but he's about to talk about it right now. How do we know the hadiths have been preserved?
Oh, they asked a question.
Yeah.
Video. Oh, okay.
of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
How do we know that the hadith have been preserved to the present day?
Hadith basically is the prophetic tradition, information attributed to the Prophet, what he said, what he did, or what he agreed to. This is what basically hadith means. With regards to the hadith, do we have anything written from the 1st century or the 2nd century? We have very little. What we do have, we have the chains of hadith that can actually give us confidence as to the authenticity of these basically reports. For example, when we pick up Sahih al-Bukhari, which is one of the most authentic collections of hadith. So we have the prophetic tradition compiled in Sahih al-Bukhari by Imam Bukhari. Imam Bukhari died in the 3rd century Hijri. So some people may ask this question, that how can Bukhari know what happened at the time of the Prophet 200 years later? That's a very good question. We explained to them the collection of Bukhari, or Bukhari himself, did not put anything without authority, without authentication, without having confidence in the information. So how did he do that? He was following a chain of narration. For example, Bukhari, when he says, Qala Rasulullah, the Prophet said, whatever he transmits to us. He says, I was told by my teacher, who was told by his teacher, and that teacher was told by his teacher, and that teacher was taught by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is a direct chain of narration going back to the Prophet. This information came to Bukhari through a chain.
How can we be sure that these are trustworthy people?
Because we have the history of each and every single individual. We know who Abdullah bin Yusuf is, where he was born, where he taught, how many people was he teaching, what was his character. Was he a dubious character or was he a truthful character? Likewise, we have information on Malik bin Anas. Was Malik bin Anas very famous, very public figure, teaching publicly to thousands of people? Then we have Nafi, who was similarly a very famous, a very well-known person who taught publicly. This knowledge was not secretly transmitted, it was publicly transmitted. That's why we have the confidence, and it wasn't transmitted to one person in secret in a dungeon. Rather, this knowledge was taught. This tradition, hadith, was transmitted in mosques to crowds of people. So that's why other people could authenticate it. They could recognize this knowledge. And if any false information was transmitted, it would be questioned, challenged immediately by these very people at that time. Hold on a second, we never heard that. Oh, maybe you added this word. Where did you get this word from? So there is a sentence from the Prophet. Someone comes with an extra word, one word added to that sentence. They would question it immediately. They would say, no, this word was not found in the transmission I received from my teacher. So this word is questionable. So this is how they preserved the tradition, the history, the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. nearly 1,000 years. To write commentaries on them, they started to do their own independent researches. They had their own labs, they had their own observatories. So Muslims pioneered these works for nearly 1,000 years.
Which religion will write the history of the future?
I believe all religions are dead. All religions are dead except Islam. Okay, Christianity is dying. Europeans have completely left Christianity. Christianity is dying in America. Christianity is dying in South America. There is only one continent where Christianity is surviving due to a lot of humanitarian work with regards to education and medical support. That's Africa. Other than that, Christianity is on the decline. So other religions are also declining. If you want to talk about Hinduism, it's declining. Clearly, when you look at the situation in India, this new Hindu revolution under the guise of Hindutva is a big travesty. It's a big unfortunate occurrence. So Islam is the only religion which is making huge progress. Hundreds of thousands of people are accepting Islam. Those people who find themselves in a spiritual dilemma, those people who have nothing to look forward to, when they have empty lives, they wake up to the reality of Islam sometimes when they're exposed to it and they accept Islam. So Islam is the fastest growing religion in Europe. There are Swedish, German, British, French, even Spanish and Italian individuals who are accepting Islam in large numbers, in particular women. Same is happening in South America and North America. Same is happening in Africa. So Islam is the religion of the future. Islam will write the future, I believe.
Brother Adnan Rashid, thank you for sharing your experiences and wisdom and knowledge with us.
Is he not?
1,000 years.
He's
Which
not
religion
wrong.
will write the history?
Christianity is dying.
W vid.
Bro, big W's. Christianity is dying, bro. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad to see what's happening. But it, like, bro, there's literally a church outside of my building with gay pride flags. Like, what? What? Why are they promoting being gay? I don't even understand. None of us would exist if our parents were gay.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's what? It literally doesn't make sense. It's as if they want the future for everybody to be gay. If you're gay, you don't have any children.
Yeah.
Why is it pushed so hard, bro? But dude, it's true what he said at the end there. Like, every religion is. Do religions even mean anything anymore besides Islam?
I don't know, bro.
I mean, it means something, but how strong is it?
Yeah.
You know, because if
Funny
you,
thing is,
the more
Yeah,
you
go
stand for, the less strength there is.